The wind howled across the Yukon like a living thing, dragging thin sheets of snow across the ground. The sun was only a pale glow behind the clouds, weak and distant. Parker Schnabel stood near the edge of the cut, hands buried in his jacket pockets, staring at the frozen earth that had consumed so many of his years. The machines were silent for the moment, just the soft creak of metal cooling in the cold. He could almost hear his own heartbeat echoing in the emptiness. For months the crew had worked themselves raw. The long summer had burned them to exhaustion, and the early frost had stolen what little strength they had left. But Parker wouldn't stop. He couldn't. The goal was too close, $30 million in gold. That number wasn't just a dream. It was a promise he had made to himself, to his family, to every miner who'd ever doubted that the kid from Haines could outdig them all. But success never comes easy in the Yukon. Out here, the land fights back. The ground hides its riches beneath layers of frozen dirt and ancient secrets, and it takes everything a man has to uncover it. Parker's crew knew that better than anyone. Mitch, Tyson, Brennan, the men who'd stood by him season after season, were starting to show cracks. The cold mornings stretched into endless days, the sound of diesel engines never stopped, and the weight of Parker's drive pressed on every shoulder like a load of gravel. He demanded perfection because he demanded it of himself, but lately even he could feel the tension tightening like a cable about to snap. By midweek, that cable finally did snap. The morning began like any other, dark, biting cold, breath turning to ice. The crew gathered around the equipment, half awake, nursing cups of coffee that tasted like mud. Parker barked orders through the radio, voice sharp, eyes scanning every movement. They were behind schedule. The sluices running slower than they should. Then it happened. A roar, a grinding of gears, a shriek of metal tearing itself apart. One of the excavators went down hard, smoke pouring from its engine. Brennan jumped out of the cab, shouting curses into the freezing air. The men surrounded the machine, shouting over one another, frustration spilling into anger. Parker rushed over, jaw tight. "We don't stop. Get it fixed." But no one moved. The anger that had been building for weeks finally broke through the surface. "Fixed?" Mitch snapped. "We've been fixing your damn machines for months, Parker. They're breaking faster than we can run them." Parker's glare cut through the cold. "Then work harder." That was it. Helmets hit the ground. Someone swore loud enough for the whole camp to hear. A few men climbed into their trucks, engines growling in defiance. Gravel spit from their tires as they tore off into the distance, leaving behind a silence that seemed to swallow the entire cut. Parker stood there, motionless, as snow drifted against his boots. Half his crew gone. The few who stayed, gathered by the campfire that night, their faces lit by the weak orange glow. No one spoke at first. The fire cracked, the wind hissed through the trees, and every man stared into the flames, lost in his own thoughts. Finally, Tyson spoke, his voice low. "They're gone for good, huh?" Parker nodded slowly. "They made their choice." "Can't say I blame 'em," another muttered. "This ground's cursed." That word hung in the air. Cursed. Parker didn't believe in curses, but even he couldn't ignore the way the Yukon seemed to test him. The storms, the breakdowns, the betrayals. It was as if the land itself wanted to keep its gold buried. Still, Parker wasn't ready to quit. Not after coming this far.
He pulled out the old survey maps, spreading them on the hood of his truck. His finger traced over the faded lines until it stopped on one section. The hollow cut. Every record said it was worthless. Played out years ago. No one had found gold there since the early miners left it behind. But Parker saw something others had missed. The way the gravel shimmered faintly. The dark streaks of black sand. The strange pull he felt every time he walked that ground. It was a risk, maybe even madness, but it was all he had left. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we dig the hollow." The next morning came with a gray dawn and a biting wind. The crew looked uneasy as they fired up the machines. The ground groaned under the weight of the dozers, thick mud clinging to their boots like tar. "Run it," Parker ordered. "All of it." Diesel roared. Steel bit into frozen
soil. For hours, the men worked without rest, moving tons of earth through the sluice. The air filled with the grind of rock and the hiss of water. Then the pumps began to choke. The mats clogged. Everything slowed to a crawl. "Shut it down," Parker said finally. The engines died one by one until the Yukon was silent again. Parker walked forward alone, boots sinking into the mud. He crouched by the sluice, peeled back the mats with his own hands, and froze. Underneath, streaks of gold shone through the black sand, thick, heavy, unmistakable. "Holy!" Tyson whispered, but the words died on his tongue. Parker scooped up a handful, the weight shocking him. Nuggets the size of his thumb glinted in the weak light. Not flakes, not dust, real gold. The hollow wasn't empty. It was alive. The silence hung heavy as the last of the gravel rolled through the sluice. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The air itself seemed to tighten around them. In the dull gray light, gold gleamed against black sand like fire trapped in stone. It wasn't a trick of the sun. It was real. Parker's gloved hand trembled slightly as he lifted another mat, more gold sliding free in a bright, heavy stream. For a moment, all the exhaustion, all the anger, all the doubts vanished. The Yukon wind roared overhead, but Parker didn't hear it. He only saw the metal shining back at him. "Bag it," he said quietly. His voice was steady again. "Get every ounce." The men moved fast now, their energy reborn. Shovels scraped, buckets clanked, laughter broke through the chill. Hope spread through the crew like wildfire. The hollow cut, everyone's joke, was alive with gold. When night fell, the storm rolled in again. Thunder rumbled through the mountains and rain came hard, turning the cut into a river of mud. But no one stopped. The pumps rattled, the wash plant groaned, and the sluice boxes overflowed with black sand and gold. Hours later, Parker stood under the tarp near the cleanup table. Water dripped from his hair, his coat soaked through. Tyson dumped the last bucket across the mats, and Parker watched as the gold separated from the gravel, gathering thick and bright at the bottom. He leaned close, eyes tracing the glow. This isn't chance. This is history. By morning, the story had already begun to travel. Truckers whispered it at fuel stops. Miners swapped it over cheap beer. Parker Schnabel, the kid everyone said pushed too hard, had pulled gold out of ground the old-timers swore was dead. Within days, the deserters began to drift back. The first truck rolled in before sunrise, headlights cutting
through fog. Then another and another. Men stepped out quietly, faces drawn with regret. No one spoke at first. The sound of idling engines filled the camp until one of them finally approached Parker. "We were wrong," he said simply. Parker's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe them, but the memory of their trucks vanishing into the dark still stung. "You left," he said. "Yeah," the man admitted. "But we came back." The others murmured behind him, some ashamed, others proud. A few tried to laugh it off. Parker listened in silence. Then he pointed toward the hollow. "Not everyone gets a second chance," he said. "Those who stayed earned their place." Some nodded and turned away quietly. Others shouted, anger flashing through the cold air. "You think you did this alone?" one snapped. "We built this camp too!" Parker's stare didn't waver. "Then you should have stayed." The argument died there. The wind carried their voices away into the trees. Inside the camp, the work never slowed. The remaining crew doubled their efforts. Machines thundered day and night, floodlights cutting through fog like beacons. Every cleanout brought more gold than the last. The sluice mats jammed from sheer weight, trays bent under the load. "Look at this," Tyson said one night, holding up a chunk the size of a fist. "I've never seen anything like it." Parker studied the nugget, silent. The glow reflected in his eyes, but his face stayed hard. He wasn't celebrating yet. "Keep running," he said. "We're not done." The Yukon didn't care about celebrations. Storms swept down from the north without warning, tearing through the camp. Mudslides pushed against the berms. The creek rose until the pumps choked on silt. Still they worked. Every hour mattered. As the piles of gold grew higher, so did the unease. "This much gold. It's not right," one old miner whispered around the fire. "The ground doesn't give this easy, not without taking something back." Parker didn't answer. He didn't believe in curses. But at night, when the wind screamed through the valley, he sometimes wondered what the land might demand in return. Then came the outsiders. Rival miners first, faces he recognized from other claims, now driving slow past the gate. Then men in suits, surveyors with clipboards, strangers taking pictures from the ridge. The story had spread too far. Everyone wanted a piece.
Driven into the mud along the western boundary, his name wasn't on them. He ripped the first one out himself, the wooden post splintering in his grip. "They think they can claim this?" he muttered. That night, he called a meeting. The crew gathered in the mess tent, mud still clinging to their boots. "We hold the line," Parker told them. "No one steps onto this claim without my say-so. If we have to work around the clock, we do it." From then on, the camp turned into a fortress. Trucks lined the perimeter, headlights blazing into the dark. Men stood watch in rotating shifts. Floodlights burned through the night like sentinels. But even that couldn't stop what came next. Sabotage started small. A hose sliced open clean through the middle. A pump drained dry overnight. A set of brand new tires shredded like paper. No one ever saw who did it. The crew blamed rivals. Some whispered about ghosts. Parker just tightened his jaw and kept them digging. Then came the drones. Small black shapes hovering above the cut, their red lights blinking in the dark. At first there was one, then two, then half a dozen, watching silently. "Someone's filming us," Tyson said one night, pointing upward. Parker shielded his eyes. "Let them watch," he said. "They'll see what real work looks like." Still, he felt the weight of those unseen eyes. Every cleanup, every pour of gold, every cheer, the sky seemed to be watching. When the count passed 10 million, disbelief turned into awe. At 20, silence fell over the camp each time the scales tipped. By 25, the laughter gave way to something else. Fear, maybe, or reverence. Finally, they reached the last cleanout. The air hung thick with anticipation. The entire crew gathered around the scale, faces streaked with dirt and sweat. Parker lifted the final tray. It was heavier than any before. He poured slowly. The gold spilled out in a thick cascade, clinking against steel until the last nugget dropped. The needle on the scale wavered, trembled, then stopped. 30 million. For a long time, no one spoke. Then the camp erupted. Men shouted, hugged, some fell to their knees laughing, others cried openly. The Yukon night came alive with noise and light. Parker didn't move. He stood still, eyes fixed on the gold mountain glowing under lantern light. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "It almost broke us before it gave in." The words cut through the chaos. The cheers faded into quiet understanding. Every man there knew the truth. The hollow cut had nearly destroyed them before it made them legends. But legends never rest easy. Within days, trouble returned. Storms tore across the Yukon, flooding the cut and turning the roads into rivers of mud. A dozer slipped down the bank, nearly crushing two men. Cables snapped, equipment sank, and every fix seemed to fail just when they needed it most. Then came the officials, government inspectors with thick folders and stern faces. Taxes, permits, safety violations. Letters stamped with seals that meant trouble. Corporations called too, offering partnerships, investors, deals too big to ignore. Parker turned them all down. He knew what they wanted: the gold, the story, the glory. "This isn't theirs," he told Tyson quietly. "It's ours. We bled for it." Still, the weight of $30 million pressed heavy on him. At night, when the storms rolled over the mountains and thunder shook the walls, he wondered if the old miners were right, if some treasures weren't meant to be found. The season ended under a bruised sky. The machine stood still for the first time in months, their steel bodies streaked with rust and rain. The crew gathered one last time by the pit, the hole in the earth that had swallowed so much of their lives. Parker looked out over it, the wind tugging at his coat. He could still see the faint gleam of gold in the mud below, flashes of light where the water pooled. "It's not the end," he said softly. "It's just the beginning." No one answered. They didn't need to. The Yukon would always wait, silent and unforgiving, daring the next man to dig deeper. And somewhere beneath that frozen ground, another secret slept, waiting for Parker Schnabel to wake it again. Weeks passed after the final cleanup, yet the camp didn't feel like a victory ground. The air was different, heavy, quiet, almost watchful. Most of the crew expected celebrations, but Parker stayed distant. He moved through the camp like a man half somewhere else, counting every crate, signing papers, checking each truckload. They had done the impossible. They had beaten the odds, pulled more gold from the Yukon earth than any modern crew had ever dreamed. But there was no sense of triumph in his eyes. Tyson noticed it first. "You haven't smiled once," he said one night, tossing a chunk of frozen mud into the fire. "You realize what we've done? You realize nobody will ever top this?" Parker didn't answer for a while. He stared into the flames, the reflection of the fire dancing in his tired eyes. "We didn't just dig up gold. We dug up a curse." Tyson frowned. "You don't really believe that." "I don't know what I believe anymore. I used to think gold was the goal, that it meant freedom, security, success. But after this, after what we went through, I'm not so sure." The next morning, he found a newspaper nailed to the camp gate. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Parker Schnabel strikes $30 million gold vein, the Yukon King." Underneath was a photo of him standing beside the sluice box, exhaustion written across his face. It wasn't even a good picture. Someone must have taken it from a distance. But it was already being passed around the world. The media swarmed. Helicopters buzzed above the valley. Journalists tried to sneak past the barriers. Reporters shouted questions whenever he appeared. "What are you going to do with the money? Is it true you're selling the claim? Do you think the Yukon has more left?" He didn't answer any of them. He didn't even look at the cameras. That night, Parker sat alone in his trailer, the sound of rain hammering on the roof. He opened one of the crates and looked at the gold stacked neatly inside. It was beautiful, hypnotic almost. Each bar shimmered with the light of years of struggle. But all he felt was tired. He thought of the men who had left, of those who had stayed, of the storms, the arguments, the close calls. The price of that gold was more than money could measure. The crew began to drift apart once the season officially ended. Some took their share and left quietly, others promised to return next year. The camp grew emptier by the day. One night, Tyson stopped by Parker's trailer for the last time. "You'll be back out here, won't you?" he asked. Parker hesitated. He looked out the window, at the hollow stretching into darkness, the moonlight glinting off puddles where gold once lay. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe." Tyson nodded slowly. "If you do, I'll be here." They shook hands, a silent understanding between them, the kind forged only through mud, sweat, and survival. When Tyson drove off the next morning, his taillights vanished into fog. The sound of his truck faded until only the wind remained. Winter came fast. The Yukon turned white and silent, the trees heavy with snow. The camp, once alive with noise and motion, now stood like a frozen monument to what they had achieved. Parker stayed longer than he should have. He said it was to make sure everything was secured before the freeze, but deep down, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He walked the empty paths, past the silent wash plant and the buried sluices. The footprints in the mud had hardened to stone. Every corner of the place told a story of anger, of hope, of victory paid for in blood and exhaustion. He stopped at the edge of the hollow cut. Snow drifted down, soft and quiet. The hole stretched deep and dark, a wound carved into the earth. This is where it all began. And maybe where it ends. He stood there a long time, until the cold bit through his gloves, and his breath came out in clouds. Months passed. The world moved on, but the legend of the Yukon strike grew. News outlets called it the richest single-season haul in modern gold mining history. Documentaries were made. Investors came knocking. Some called Parker a genius, others said he was lucky. But he didn't care about fame or praise. He had learned something far heavier, that gold could change everything, including the men who chased it. In the city, the noise and lights felt wrong. He missed the wind, the silence, the sound of gravel against steel. He spent nights awake, replaying
The season in his mind. Every risk, every loss, every ounce of gold pouring through his hands. He started to understand why old miners never truly quit. It wasn't greed, it was the pull, the call of the land itself, whispering to dig one more bucket, to find one more vein. Then, one morning in early spring, a package arrived at his door. No return address. Inside was a small glass vial filled with a few flakes of gold, unmistakably from the hollow cut. There was a note folded beneath it, written in a hand he didn't recognize. "There's more beneath the ice. Come back before someone else does." Parker stared at it for a long time. Then he smiled, the first real smile in months. The Yukon was calling again. By the time the thaw began, his trucks were already packed. The familiar roar of engines filled the morning air. The road north stretched ahead, empty and waiting. As he drove, memories of that season flashed through his mind. The storms, the silence, the gold gleaming under floodlight. He didn't know if the next season would bring fortune or ruin, maybe both. But that was the thing about the Yukon. It gave nothing freely, yet for those willing to face its fury, it sometimes revealed miracles. And for Parker Schnabel, The gold wasn't just metal. It was proof that no matter how deep the darkness, there was always light buried beneath. You just had to dig for it. He arrived at the claim just as dawn broke. The sunlight cut across the mountains, turning the snow to fire.